Why are there so many podcasts about Tottenham? Do I want to know why? They might contain insight, but mostly delusions. If I hear one more, I might die. They don't like Levy and they don't like Enoch. They pine for Moo and Conte. Someday we'll like 'em, old Tottenham Hotspur, the podcast clout chasers and me.
Fuck it, we're live. Hello. Welcome to Poddenham Podspur, the Spurs pod about Spurs pods that's too busy to do its homework and would definitely blame it on the dog if it could get away with it. My name's Ian, and I'm here today to not really talk about any specific Spurs podcasts. Instead, I've asked for some listener questions. I've been a little busy. I'm the chairperson of the Montgomery County Spurs official supporters club, and this weekend we organised a huge get-together with 8 other supporters clubs in our Mid-Atlantic region here in the United States of America. That's where I live, despite my accent. So we got together in Washington, D.C. I think it was between 150 to 200 of us to watch the West Ham game, and we had a right laugh. It was fantastic. We had people come all the way from Delmarva, which is up in Salisbury, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore, and all the way down to, I'm not sure what the most southern Virginia supporters club would be, but Richmond, Roanoke, Virginia Beach, Charlottesville. Some people came from about 3 hours to Washington, D.C. to watch us draw 1-1 with West Ham. But it was so good. We had prize giveaways and singing and cats and children and Spurs love. And it's just one of those things that right now, with all the kind of crap that's being thrown at Spurs fans, it was amazing to get together with that many of us in one place with support from the club itself and have a good time. And the other thing that's kind of going on in my supporters club orbit is that the board of Montgomery County Spurs is turning over. We're holding our first call for nominations this year. We've got some folks who are leaving, we've got some folks who are joining us, and so I've just spent a lot of time sending out emails and coordinating with people to try to onboard whoever we can ready for the off season, so we can get some cool stuff organised for our community next season. So that's where I'm at. Like I said, let's do a call to action. That's what it says in my show notes. My name's Ian. You can follow me on Blue Sky at ian.coys.social. You can follow the pod at poddenhampodspur.bsky.social, or you can email me at poddenhampodspur at gmail.com. So, like I said, I've been busy, and I asked my wonderful Blue Sky followers and friends to send me questions for me to digest and think about. This is my first time really dealing with listener questions, and I think it's nice on my podcast journey to be a bit more off the cuff than the highly scripted, well, not highly scripted, but reasonably scripted approach that I've had so far. I like to do my homework and ponder about a question, which is part of the reason why I didn't want to put out a sort of podcast digestion show this week, is because I didn't really have the time to think about what I wanted to say, despite this being such a kind of important moment in Spurs this season. But I can wriggle out of that when I reconsider and think, well, we're only at half-time of the Buda Glimt game. I hope I said Buda, right? Let's just go with Glimt. We're at halftime, so I think it's okay to wait until the dust has settled. Hopefully we get through Thursday with a 10-goal, win on an artificial pitch and no more injuries. And we're all looking forward to a huge game in Bilbao in 2 weeks. But right now, just going to take a step back from going super deep into these podcasts that we all love or not love, as the case might be. And I'm going to answer some questions, some more general things. And I think that from the little bit that I've seen of these questions, I've tried to not do my homework. I think the little bit that I've seen, maybe it will spark some ideas, spark some conversations that might bring this show forward, and perhaps I can use this as a launch pad for just generally pondering and questioning what I've done so far in the 8 episodes that I've recorded and where I'd like to go next season. So, listener questions. Thanks to everybody who asked a question on the NGL app. I posted this on my Blue Sky. We had, I think, about a dozen questions that came in, which is quite nice. I'm going to try to tackle all of them. If any more come in while I'm recording, I'll try to get to it. But fair warning, I might have to stop recording depending on how bad the thunderstorm outside is. It's incredibly wet and rainy this evening in beautiful Rockville, Maryland. And I hope that the thunder and lightning doesn't target my aluminium siding house. Yes, aluminium, aluminum, whatever you prefer. So, listener questions. Question number 1 came in, and it's asking me which pod got me hooked on Spurs podcasts. I want to say the first Spurs podcast I tuned into and really paid attention to was The Fighting Cock. I think what they were putting out was perfect for my life at that point. Bit of a wild child. I certainly enjoyed the nightlife, and hearing these what I considered at the time kind of cool guys chatting about their lives and their love for Spurs was something that I wanted a lot more of. You know, a lot of my friends were football fans, but not necessarily Spurs fans at that particular point when I was doing my PhD in my sort of early 20s. And just what they were putting out, I really enjoyed. I remember New Year's Eve in 2014, cold night, you know, British lads out, none of us had jackets on. We were staying over at my mate Shane's house, and me and my brother got kicked out of some club. We ended up getting a cab back to my mate Shane's house, and we were sat on the stoop. Phil has got Raynaud, so it was freezing on this night, like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. on New Year's Eve in the United Kingdom. And I remember just playing to him. I can't remember what episode of The Fighting Cock I downloaded to my my HTC smartphone at the time, but I was just trying to keep him from dying. So in some ways, I think that Flav and the boys have kept my brother in my life. So I thank them for that. But I think I've been sort of championing and talking about and telling other people to listen to Spurs podcasts really since then. From there, I'm not really sure how the metastasis into other areas of the Spurs podosphere really happened. There would definitely have been a progression into Rule the Roost with what Jack was doing with Seb and Raj, where they were interviewing other podcasts from other teams. The Extra Inch, I'm not quite sure when they started up. I feel like that was a bit later. I started to get into American pods because I was reading Cartilage Free Captain a lot, even before I moved to America. And through that, I think I found Wheeler Dealer Radio. Sadly, on hiatus at the moment. Bring it back, Greg and the boys. That would be fantastic. And as you get more and more online, you start finding more and more podcasts are kind of pushed into your timeline, and you find out people are friends with other podcasters, or they show up, and eventually you just start accumulating them like Pokemon. And I think that's what I'm at now. I'm sort of getting through. I've been through the original 151 of the Spurs show and Fighting Cock, and I'm moving into the 1,000 or so out there that no one's ever heard of, but all have their merits and are all cute in their own little ways. So I hope I answered that question. Thank you for sending that in. The next question is, why do we keep losing, man? And then he just sent a crying emoji. I don't know. I mean, if you're listening to a Spurs pod about Spurs pods, you'd think I would have the answer from the sheer volume of opinions on this that I've heard. I think where I'm at is Spurs are a good team with all the right pieces that just maybe haven't quite fitted together this year, and there's been a lot of bad luck that's layered on top of that. So I was talking to a friend the other day at a watch party. I think it was the Thursday game against the Glimt, and I was just saying that, you know, of course we've made it to a semi-final of a League Cup and we're in a semi-final of the Europa League because we've got good players. It's just that we've had maybe 5% drops across the board in every area, whether that be management, use of rotation, for example. I know people could complain about that. It's one of the things that I've maybe got some questions about. Substitutions, especially, we saw only one used against West Ham. Maybe there could have been some more kids on the bench. But it's been tough because there have been injuries, and that's maybe a bit more than 5%. But there's been a lot of injuries. We've had a lot of bad luck. We've had players out suspension. 7 games for Bentancur is layered on top. The fans have dropped because we're losing games, so there's another 5%. So I think once you total all of those 5% up in a game like football, elite sport in any particular fashion, whether that be cycling, swimming, darts, sprinting, rugby, cricket, when you're at that top level, the difference between the best teams and the worst of the best teams, I think, is those 5%. There's no bad players, there's no bad managers, there's just a combination of bad factors. And as the season has worn on, we've obviously prioritized the Europa League more and more, in my opinion. And it's potentially going to play out to be a highly successful season in that regard if we're lucky. So we are losing now. Crying emoji person. We will start winning again soon. I guarantee it. Knock on wood. Hope that got picked up. Okay, thank you for that. Next question. Could the Spurs fan base handle success, or are we so preconditioned to misery that we secretly long for Spursiness? Well, I'm going to pull you up on the word Spursy. I hate that word. I've banned it from our watch parties, which I don't know if I can really physically enforce that, but, my friend Max pointed it out to somebody at the watch party in DC on Sunday that I've banned the word. I don't like it. I think it lets us down. I don't like Danny Kelly's stance on The View from the Lane, that he's recontextualizing it and reclaiming it. I think it's a bullshit word that idiots made up to try to make fun of Spurs for being actually a very successful team, and a team that has expectations and hopes and passion for what they do, when all they want for us is to be shit like we are in the league at the moment, so they can sing about us. So I hate the word Spursy. I appreciate what you're saying. But to come back to the central crux of your question, can our fan base handle success, or are we preconditioned to misery? I think this is all guesswork, right? I think that the fan base would change. Absolutely. I think that we would have an influx of new supporters with new ideas and new feelings. Let's say we went on a Man City style rebuild with mysterious ethical benefactor, so everything else stayed the same. There would be so many new fans who are there and have only known Spurs as a good team. I guess we kind of saw this under Pochettino, but we didn't win anything. But there would be so many new fans. I think that there's a risk that their voices would be abrasive up against the traditional fans, the ones who maybe long for or have become preconditioned to misery and are expecting everything to fall apart. So I think that we would handle success through evolution. I think that, we saw this with Manchester City. We saw this with Chelsea to a certain extent. They were a good team-ish. They won an FA Cup, right, back in the 90s. The money came in, and the fan base evolved and changed. There was an amplification of what was already there. I feel like I'm backtracking on my statement earlier, but now I consider it more. There was an arrogance about Chelsea and Chelsea fans anyway in the 90s, partially due to where they are in London, partially due to just kind of the makeup of perhaps of their fan base, and that just got turned up to 11 with success and money. They almost embraced being plastics. You can see it in their players, where for many, many years, especially in the 2010s, Chelsea were run, that dressing room, by the players, and I feel like that lack of history is owned and celebrated. Man City is an interesting case because I feel like there are some really good Man City fans out there. There are a lot of new fans who are only in it for the star players. But in their case, I think there's a humbleness to some of the legacy Man City fans. And I feel like maybe Spurs would be like that. Where if you threw, Mbappe and, regeneration of Van Dijk into our team, and we won the league for the next 9 out of the next 10 years. We won a Champions League, right? Fantasy stuff. I feel like we'd be more like Man City than we would like Chelsea. So I don't think we're necessarily preconditioned to misery. More so that we've built up a number of defences, partially because of that word, Spursy, that you included in your question. And I wonder what would happen to those defences in the situation where we didn't need them anymore. So it's an interesting question. I'd like to hear what other people think about that. Moving on, we've got, if you were stranded on a desert island with 3 Spurs podcasters, who would you choose and why? Ooh, a desert island. Well, I'm very pale and I have a bald head, so I hope I have a hat. 3 Spurs podcasters. Okay. Trying to think. I would want somebody who I feel like could be resourceful. Who do I think is resourceful? I feel like Andrew on Tottenham Depot seems like a pretty chipper guy. He's resourceful emotionally, so that would be a good time. Seems like a decent guy from the podcast itself. Who else would be good? I want somebody who's good at telling stories, maybe. Somebody who's maybe met a lot of Spurs players over the years. So maybe somebody from the Spurs show. Take your pick. I don't know. Mike or Theo, one of those two. And who else would I want? Last one. Who's gonna have a good time? I feel like Spooky might have a good time on a desert island. Plenty of time to ponder, plenty of time to think. I'm sure he'd have plenty of good, questions philosophical questions for us to turn over and think about while we're waiting for the rescue team. So I've already forgotten who I said. So interesting question. Okay, next. Which Spurs pod do you think would have to work the hardest to qualify Ange's success if we won the Europa League? Ooh. There are some that have dug in. There are some that have really dug in and, I've seen a lot of takes online that maybe the extra inch have gone too far into Ange hatred, and whilst I don't agree with that, I could also admit that maybe I'm slightly blinkered, as I like all 3 of them, and I don't think they've been that bad. And I think that they've at least given credit to the team in their recent wins, even if they're frustrated with it. Whereas some of the other podcasts I can think of, like Echoes of Glory, The Spurs Show, I've mentioned the same. I'm going to mention the same 5 podcasts in this show. But there are some that have gone so hard on taking any of these successes away from Ange and just putting it all on the players, commanding the team in spite of his directions, that I think they'd have a really hard time backtracking on that. But at the same time, I think that listening back to the Spurs Show podcast in the wake of the semi-final win over Ajax in 2019, a lot of these podcasts, if we won the Europa League, are just going to be purely vibes based for a good while. There's not going to be too much dissection of what it all means. And there's some people saying that they want Ange to go if he wins the Europa League. I don't know how much of this is just kind of reacting to losses. It's kind of the problem with the structure at the moment for all of these podcasters. If you're reviewing after a weekend game, the most recent thing that you've got in your memory bank is something terrible rather than the good thing. So the good thing that happened on a Thursday night. So I don't think that those who are dug in would necessarily even try to qualify Ange's success. I think that they would just take what was on the field. A lot of podcasts have been pretty consistent with their questioning of Ange Postecoglou as a manager. And I think that's better than some of the flip-flopping that I see, especially from a few of the YouTube-centric podcasters, where there seems to be a much higher desire to chase the algorithm. And I'll come back to that. I think one of my questions is about that just came in. In fact, I'll do it now. This came in just as I started recording. Thank you to the person who sent in that last question. This one came in through NGL. How much of podcast opinions / takes are performative because they're on a podcast? Are there podcasts that do this more than others? So I think there's a few different ways to tackle this question. There's one which is to take everybody's word as their most earnest opinion. And in that case, you could say that 99% of takes are performative because they're just trying to present their honest selves, their true opinions that they formed themselves. And they're doing it because they want to be the realest they can behind the mic, right? And I think that there's a desire for most people who go on a podcast to be like that. Right? You know, there's an affect to getting behind the mic and talking for an hour that can come from a desire to be kind of crunchy and real. So that's kind of what I'm going for, if I'm honest. I'm a guy staring at a wall, basically, in my spare room, trying to just pour my heart out. So I'd say that would be an example of somebody like Spooky, of Jack Rule the Roost. I'd say that any of the smaller podcasts, 1882, N17, Tottenham Chronicles, Tottenham Boys Making All the Noise, Come and Discuss Spurs, if they're not doing it for the money, I would say that most of those are pretty authentic. And I would say that their podcast opinions are not performative in the sense of lying, essentially, or being an actor, playing a character. I think a problem that you have when you get behind a mic, and I realized this at my 9th episode of having my own show, is that it's quite difficult to convey yourself naturally and authentically without experience. So I think about the shows like Last Word on Spurs, where they sometimes have newbies on, and they're quite sort of antagonistic. And I wonder if some of that is just kind of a reaction to the situation they find themselves in. Like, you don't get comfortable behind the mic. It's also part of the reason why I've held off a little bit on inviting too many people on, is I want myself to be as comfortable here and translating myself into the podcast as authentically as I can. I don't see the need to be a character. I'm this earnest and this intense most of the time. If we take it a little bit more cynically and take the performative aspect to mean, like I said, playing a character, I definitely think there are some where they've taken elements of themselves and they've turned it up all the way, and it's on full blast. I think that this is good things sometimes. For example, I think that some of the lads on the Fighting Cock are making sure that they get their best material onto the airwaves. I respect that, because that's a difficult skill to land, and they've done it in a way that's become incredibly popular. And then it can be performative, like, again, I don't want to name names, but I feel like some of the more YouTube-focused content, think of the people like Mark Goldbridge, but in the Spurs space, are definitely performing to get people sort of staring like a car crash, or for just the type of person who likes drama and bullshit to engage with them, and they get a lot of clicks and a lot of views, a lot more than I get. So maybe that'll be the next iteration of Poddenham Podspur, is I'll become a drama YouTuber instead. I don't think I'm quite good looking enough for that, but That's the way it is. Okay, just got another NGL question that came in. I had some shit that just fell off my desk. All right, it's from Team NGL. This is tell me, who do you like right now? Tottenham Hotspur. All right, next question. What are the top 3 bad takes you've heard on a Spurs pod since you started doing Poddenham Podspur? Ooh, 3 bad takes. I'd say one of them, and I did a whole thread about this on Blue Sky the other day. I just kind of shouted into the void my frustrations. One of them would be manager talk. So I kind of find it a bit repugnant that we're talking about a new manager before Ange's even left us. It feels a little bit like talking ill of the dead before they're dead. But if you're going to do it, at least be serious, right? At least acknowledge, like, who can we get who's a serious manager in 2025? Okay, so you want Iriola. You know they're not going to come now, they're going to come in the summer, possibly. Okay, cool. That's kind of at least a semi-intelligent conversation you can have. If you're pulling out Harry Redknapp or, Rafa Benitez, guys who are not quite dinosaurs, but they're certainly turning into fossils in real time, I don't see how that's a constructive conversation. And I think that actually with the test of time, they've been proven to be bad takes. If you want to get Harry Redknapp in because you don't think we can make it to the Europa League final, well, again, knock on wood, we're in the driving seat right now with the guy who apparently stinks. So at the very least, suggest somebody who's out of work and would be a decent modern manager. I think Xavi's out of work, throw that name in there. Ryan Mason would be another one. So, why would you get Ryan Mason in again? Why would you throw him under the bus in this situation just because you don't like Ange at this point, or because we just lost a game and you have to get on a podcast and bare your soul? Like, this is part of the problem of doing podcasts too soon after a bad result. I think another bad take would be that the win over Hoffenheim was purely a result of a player uprising. I think that this is just, again, I find it a bit repugnant. I just find it difficult to qualify that any professional footballer can step out onto the pitch and ignore their manager's instructions, and then after that game, the manager isn't fired for losing the dressing room, or the player isn't benched for the players aren't benched for disregarding the manager's instructions. I find that difficult, and I think that's just trying to cope with your bias going into a game that you thought we were going to lose because you don't like the manager, but we ended up somehow winning because the manager tweaked his system. So I think that opinion was, that kind of drove me up the wall a little bit. Yeah, and my third bad take, and I don't think it's a bad take, it just isn't how I see the world, is that this Europa win, if it comes, and I probably just jinxed it by phrasing it like that, is more about the fans and more for the fans than it is for the players. And in a way, this is true, but that's just kind of the nature of football clubs. And I think saying it out loud does such a disrespect and disservice to those guys who have gone out and kicked the ball around for our pleasure and had us yell and scream at them, that it's just kind of strange. I don't think you get to yell and scream obscenities and insults and question integrity and then turn around and sort of act as if you're, whiter than white. So I didn't really enjoy that. So those would be my 3. So thanks for that. That really made me think. Created a lot of dead air that hopefully I edited out. All right. Is betting on Spurs to lose when you're Ange out and boasting about it on your podcast okay? I'm assuming this is something that happened. I must have missed this. So I think that you should never bet against Spurs. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I don't like picking players in FPL that are going to be playing Spurs because you're expecting them to score goals. I hope you get blanks when that happens. I think that doing it and then boasting about it is definitely not okay. I don't see what you're trying to convey in that situation about yourself and what you want to encourage and promote in others by boasting about your current malice towards Spurs, to the point that the only way you can get joy out of it is by a small monetary gain. If you're going to do it and you're that good at betting, if you're that good at gambling, then you should make your money another way, on another team. Don't bet against your own team. That's some weird Bruce Grobbelaar shit. I don't like that. But if you did it and you're a person that listens to this show, then I love it. So keep doing it and keep subscribing and sharing and telling your friends. But I think this is also just the way that people are processing this weird moment we're in right now. And, I've said this before, Spurs fans aren't a monolith, and we have so many people who get behind a microphone on a regular basis to talk about the team that you're going to have a few people who are looking to sort of signal how they're coping in a unique way or in an absurd way. So part of me thinks that anybody who says that they bet against Spurs and are sort of committed enough to be on a podcast, maybe telling a little porcupine there. All right. Next question. Are you working on a short ending theme yet? Was thinking a 30-second song underlining how it's okay to have different opinions. Well, why would I lie on a podcast? It's not okay to have different opinions. So I have zero musical ability. I have a voice maybe for talking, certainly not for singing. There was a point in my life where I wanted to be, singer in a metal or a punk band, but due to my lack of rhythm, that didn't really happen. So the wonderful opening theme that we have for Poddenham Podspur was created by the great and excellent and amazing Neb Economou. And I have no idea what I would do for a song as an outro, but this is a good question. It's part of the evolution of the show. As I've recorded, I've realized, oh crap, I need to have a call to action. I need to actually say like share and subscribe, hit that that share button, all that type of stuff. I felt a pressure as I've gotten people on, or people have asked to come on, to do a good job in terms of like the sound recording, editing, and also advertising. I've tried to get the show out slightly wider than Blue Sky. If anybody feels like sharing it, that would be a good help, because I feel like if I get people on, I don't want to do them a disservice by not promoting it as hard as I could. And I'm pretty good at promoting stuff. Like, I'm pretty good at sharing stuff across Instagram and things like that for my supporters club. But in this little hobby that I've got going, something about me wants to keep it kind of rough and ready. And I also think it's kind of fun that people might learn about this show through the absurdity of it. I think that a friend telling you, oh, hey, have you heard about the Spurs pod that's about Spurs pods, elicits a, what? Hell yeah. What? Kind of reaction. And I think that's what I want people's first association with the pod to be. So, maybe I could rustle up an ending theme at some point over the summer. I've got some time to work on it. Ugh, I've been dreading this one, and I actually did a little bit of homework for it. If you were casting a reboot of the A-Team from Spurs Podders, who would you cast in what roles? All right, so for those who don't know, the A-Team was a TV show from the late 80s, early 90s, about a team of ex-special forces soldiers in America who would, I think they were almost like guns for hire, where they would turn up in a situation and help out whoever was in trouble. And there was a dynamic of four main guys. So you had Hannibal, who was kind of the leader, bit of a chameleon. I think he would wear masks and was a bit of a master of disguise. Faceman, who was a kind of good at charming the ladies. I was about to use the word Riz, and I don't think as a 39-year-old man I'm allowed to use that word. A bit of a smooth talker. Murdoch, who if I remember correctly, is a Mad Dog Murdoch, so was a bit of a loose cannon. But you didn't really know if he had it all together. And then B.A. Baracus, aka, played by Mr. T, so the hard man of the group. It's probably dumbing it down a little bit too much. So we've got Hannibal the leader. You could go with, I think, any one of the pod hosts that have been working on this for many years and have kind of grown an empire. I've gone for Flav because I think that he's clearly become a social leader through the Fighting Cock. I think that he's somewhat adaptable. If you hear him on the lab, he's a totally different guy to when he's podding on the main pod, Fighting Cock with his mates, to when he's showing up on TV or on other podcasts as a guest, when he's much more conversational. So he would be who I'd go for, but like I said, you could go with Mike Lee would be another good example, I think, of somebody who's managed to corral and create a bit of an empire. Ricky, Last Word on Spurs, would be another good one. All right, Face Man. So we're saying like a smooth talker. So for this, a smooth talker and good with the ladies, I did think as I was going through my list of Spurs podcasters that it's a difficult list for that topic. But yeah, so I focus on the smooth talking aspect of Face Man's character. And so for me, I'd say that the smoothest talkers that I enjoyed listening to would be Milo from The Game Is About Glory. Very verbose, very chatty. I feel like if he was in a situation with a woman, if that's the way he's inclined, he'd certainly have some stories to smooth his way into her good books. Another guy who I quite like listening to, I quite like the sort of tone of his voice, would be, I think it's Raz on Tottenham Boys Making All the Noise. I think he's got quite a nice cadence to his voice. So I'm going to focus on the smooth talking aspect for Face Man. Murdoch. So this is the loose cannon, but you don't really know if he's a loose cannon. Kind of wears his heart on his sleeve, maybe a bit emotional, but you suspect he's keeping it together. This is based upon the Wikipedia entry. For this, I went with Ricky Sachs from Last Word on Spurs. Not necessarily a bit of a fighter, but definitely if you listen to him post Spurs losses, he's like on the verge of tears almost. Like he's so upset. So I feel like that would be a good person for Murdoch, or any one of the sort of Spurs YouTubers. The ones I'm talking about, where like they're acting pretty intense, but is that really 100% of their real feelings on Spurs at that time? Who knows? And then we've got B.A. Baracus. I'm going to go with a proper hard man, like Ricky from the Fighting Cock. We all know that he knocked out that bouncer. You've also got Big John Bass. He's a big lad. Apparently he's handy in a fight. I feel like somebody who would start up pretty quickly would be somebody like Majestic from Same Old Spurs. I don't know much about the bloke, but he seems like he would sort of fly in pretty quickly. I feel like any one of the Spurs podcasters could fill the B.A. Baracus role pretty well. They may be not the hardest fighters, but they would certainly be up for defending their friends if they had to. That's my Spurs A team. All right. Snog, marry, avoid from the COYS podcasters. Jesus Christ. Could it just be the same as the A-team podders? To take one of them out. All right. Marry. Who would I marry? Christ almighty. I'm just looking through now. I don't know. I'm not sure I can do this. I might have to punt on this. Avoid. Okay, let's try avoid. Maybe I can avoid somebody. I don't think I'd get along well with. Oh, Christ Almighty! Could I? I have no idea. I don't want to say. You've put me in a position here. I'm just going to move on from this one. It's my podcast and I can do what I want. Snog, all of them. Marry, all of them. Avoid, none of them. They all seem like lovely folks. Right. Thank you for your wonderful question. Keep listening. Which Spurs pod that you haven't been on would you most like to be on? Okay, so I've been on a few. I've been on Come and Discuss Spurs. Stu invited me and Owen from Blue Sky on to come and talk about our experiences of using the platform. I'd love to go back on and maybe talk about kind of how things have changed since I last chatted with him in person. I've been recently on Wicked Spursy, had a great time with them. They're really nice guys. Very impressed, didn't realise they had Windy on as a guest previously, as well as Ricky, so that was really cool. That was cool to learn about that and see behind the curtain. What else have I been on? I've been on Tottenham Home and Away. That was a good time. I got to talk about my role in the supporters club here in Maryland. That was cool. And I've also been on a Friends podcast. The first podcast I think I was on was Rooster and the Villain, my friend Mike's pod with his friends Jake and Jimmy, where they talk about Spurs, Brighton and Aston Villa all together, as well as lower league US soccer. It's a very good listen. I talk about it a fair amount. So that's what I've been on so far. I think that, you know, considering myself as a person, I'm not sure I would do well in like a fighting cock environment. I mean, maybe if I'd loosened up a little bit, perhaps I could hang with those guys. But I don't know. I don't feel like I've got enough stories for that. I'd be woefully out of my depth on something like The Game Is About Glory, because they're so good on their history and they're so like talented talking about Spurs. I would feel like an absolute idiot on that. Something conversationally, I feel like maybe sitting down with somebody who likes to get a little deep about Tottenham would be good. You know, maybe something like Filthy Shambles would be quite an interesting one. I like the way Spooky does things. I hope that we hear a pod from him soon. Rule the Roost would be a good time. I think that Jack really cares about Spurs fans in sort of a similar intensity to me, but with a very different experience. You know, I'm very sort of internationally focused now that I live overseas, whereas Jack is very, you know, sort of very intensely focused on, not intensely, but focused on, you know, local supporters' experiences around Tottenham itself. I wouldn't want to go on Hometown Glory because I would feel exceptionally uncool once they got to the culture section. But honestly, if anybody wants me to come on and ramble for a bit, I'm happy to do whatever. I just like talking to Spurs fans. All right, thank you for that. It was a great question. And then last question of the main listener questions that I solicited. What or whose response to Poddenham Podspur has pleased you the most? Okay, so I did put this question last. I feel like it was a nice way to just round out this section. And I see that I've been talking for 45 minutes. Christ. I think everything has pleased me the most. I was astounded from the first moment that I put out a shitpost on Blue Sky and said, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we had a Spurs podcast about Spurs podcasts? And people started saying, no, it wouldn't. That would be something I'd listen to the point where I made the show. And people said, this is actually really good. It wasn't what I expected, but it's really good. To getting mentioned on The View from the Lane, you know, having Danny Kelly talk about an analysis I did, or I forget there were some others where I didn't even know they knew about the podcast and they mentioned it. It's been really cool to have interactions with some of the Spurs podcasters who were really nice on social media. Ricky's been very, very supportive from the Fighting Cock. Even mentioned the other day that he listened to something like 6 podcasts in a day, and mine was one of them. I mean, you know, he's on what I consider to be the kind of gold standard Spurs pod that most people are aiming for nowadays, in terms of content and reliability and heart of what most Spurs fans seem to want to listen to, at least most of the sort of young male demographic, which I fit into. But yeah, I just, everything. And everybody who's asked to come on, I know about all of you. I've just been trying to get my ducks in a row. Oh, that was a fun time. I probably shouldn't have done all 12 questions. Maybe I should have kept some back. But I do have one last little bit that I want to get into before I wrap up. I did do some homework. I said that I didn't do any homework this week. I did do some homework. So for me, when I think of listener questions, I think of the Fighting Cocks listener questions, especially their Thursday pods. There have been some absolutely insane questions that have been asked on that show over the years. They've kind of toned it down recently. So the Thursday pod, for those people who don't know, is that Flav goes on Reddit and Twitter and asks his followers, his fans, to send them questions. And usually the questions are things like, should Ange be sacked? Or why isn't, Eric Lamela still playing for the team? Or, how much do you hate Arsenal, right? Like, decent questions, but every now and then there seems to be this one-upsmanship from the fan base where they are sending in increasingly unhinged questions. I think a friend of mine sent in a question that got read out about Ange Postecoglou being naked in a bathtub and asking you to reach in and get the soap for him. Some of these questions are nuts. So for those who want to click off now, there is going to be a content warning. Some of this is going to get a little puerile and in some cases a little disturbing. So I'm going to read through some listener questions that I found from the Fighting Cock about 10 years ago. So seasons 3 through 5, 2014 and 2015. This is what I consider to be the kind of golden age of Fighting Cock listener questions. And so I'm just going to go through them in order, and I'm going to see if I don't chicken out before I get to the last question. And I don't know if I'm going to answer these, quite honestly, because I don't know if you want to think about me doing some of these things. All right. Season 3, episode 33 on March 25th, 2014. Would you rather shit a melon or piss a grape? Let's go with the grape. Season 5, episode 5, on September 2nd, 2015. Would you rather have your body found on a pile of sex toys or a pile of drugs? I feel like there's some kink shaming involved here. Personally, I wouldn't want to have the drugs involved, so I'll go with the sex toys, right? Why not? Have some fun. Own it. July 12th, 2015, from the Fighting Cock Summer Special. Would you rather have your nipples the same size as your penis, or basically vice versa? Again, just kind of... maybe there's some shaming involved here. What if you have a particularly big nipples or a particularly, less endowed appendage? I feel like I'd rather have the long nipples. At least that'd be fun, right? Could you imagine that? That's kind of a cool thing to whip out at parties. Season 5, episode 9, September 29th, 2015. Question from a listener. I face this dilemma every day at work. Do I, A, poo in cubicles closer to my office but with a higher chance of someone walking into the room disturbing my peace, or B, poo in a cubicle 4 minutes walking distance away with no chance of someone walking in? Quite frankly, I can't believe this is even a question. It's 4 minutes, dude. If this was like a 20-minute walk, then do that. Take the 4-minute walk and go poo in peace. What's wrong with you? Do you have trouble walking and chewing gum at the same time? Season 3, episode 38, April 29th, 2014. Would you make your mum do heroin, crack, or crystal meth? No whys or get outs. Again, oh my god. The thought of my mum. Again, I'm not even going to answer this. This one I might punt on. This one and the next one, I think I'm just going to say no. I'm not going to give an answer to this. This is horrendous. This is an absolutely awful question. And then building up to the last one. Oh god, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud. Season 4, episode 7. September 16th, 2014. Would you rather 6 alive cats be strapped to your head or a dying toddler strapped to your leg for the rest of your life? The cats shit and piss and do all the things cats do, but they never die. The toddler never dies, but is dying. This isn't a video podcast, but I currently have my face in my hands, so maybe I hope that my speech isn't slightly smushed. I asked my wife this question earlier, I was just giving her a prep. She said, "Hey, what are you recording on the pod later?" And I said, actually, this question. Not only was she kind of dumbfounded by the fact that kind of men talk about this type of shit, but being a very practical woman, she did ask if she could chop off her own leg. And if that was on the table, she would go with the toddler. And I thought that was a very resourceful thing. And it's one of the reasons why I love her. So So yeah, if you want me to loop back and find more Fighting Cock listener questions in the future, let me know. This was it's one thing to have these thrown in at the end of the show, right? You listen to the Fighting Cock on a Thursday, and then all of a sudden Flav breaks out, would you rather shit a melon or piss a grape? I think it's another thing to put like 6 of them together and just for them to get progressively worse. In fact, in some regards, I actually have done something that I don't think Flav and the Fighting Cock have ever done, which is just have an intense section of bouncing from awful question to awful question again, over and over. So, boys, if you want some content suggestions, if you're feeling like you're getting a bit stale, maybe just have a Thursday Q&A where you don't talk about football, you just consider things happening to your body parts, which you should never have to think about in civil society. And with that, speaking of civil society, up the Spurs. We got a big game on Thursday. We're going to win it because we're Tottenham fucking Hotspur and we're amazing. Thank you for listening. I hope that you've stuck with me the whole way. I've almost done an hour. Maybe I can ramble for 7 minutes. I had a great time. I said at the start that I wanted to do listener questions to be a little bit more off the cuff and test myself, and I think that it's been a fun experience. I think I'll do this again in the future. But with that, if you like the show, share it with your friends. Keep sending me ideas. I do hear the ideas and I do write them down and kind of process them. I like it. I like this show being something which is about community and therefore also incorporates ideas from community. So send me anything you've got. I have an interesting guest lined up, somebody who takes a similarly analytical approach to Spurs podcasts and could be an interesting person to talk about. Not a big pod, a new pod though. Hopefully that'll happen in the next few weeks, maybe early June. Over the next couple of weeks though, I think the focus has to shift back to reviewing Spurs pods. That's kind of the whole point, right? And at this moment, what we're facing could be potentially historic. So trying to record and process and digest how the community is, not the whole community, but a section of the loudest part of the the loudest section of the community is processing this moment, I think is going to be a fun time. Hopefully I can go in with some questions to ask myself as I listen. So with that, follow me at Poddenham Podspur on Blue Sky. Keep listening to Spurs podcasts. Keep making Spurs podcasts. And stay beautiful.